Hi guys, this is Alexander from Solar Leather Machines, 817-422-9151. Today I want to cover thread tension. Many people get confused about thread tension. They have the wrong ideas about it. It's a very simple concept really when you get down to it, but we're going to cover how it works today and then how you can adjust your machine to deal with thread tension. So thread tension, as we look at this, here's a piece of leather. And hopefully you can see this clearly. We've got two different threads going on. The blue thread represents the upper thread on your piece of leather. It goes up into the upper end of the machine. The red thread represents the lower end of the machine that goes down towards the bobbin. The important part is the knot happens in the middle of the piece of leather. Now, it's important to notice that yet the threads are two different colors. You can actually do this on most machines. You can run a blue thread up top and a red thread below. And sometimes that's actually nice for when you're doing decorative stitching. You can flip it over and have a completely different color. It's a nice facet of your design. But the important part to understand is that if the thread is correctly balanced, the red thread never makes it to the top of the leather, and the blue thread never makes it to the bottom of the leather. And this is correctly balanced. The knot of the leather actually should not be seen on either side of the leather. This can be difficult though when you're sewing very thin leathers and very thick threads, because the knot can many times be as thick as the leather is thick. And so there are times when you will see the knot from either side. And that's not incorrect. The important part is that the knot is equidistant from each side. And this will change with each type of thread and each style of thread, and also many times with the style of leather or thickness of leather. But this is the ideal concept. So the red thread goes up, wraps around the blue, and comes back down, etc., until it comes all the way down here in the end, and it's coming out of the machine. And these two tensions are basically equal. Okay, let's go over here a little bit. And this is the problem that most people have quite often. In the top situation, we have our piece of leather, the brown square here, and we have this bottom thread, the red is showing, and it has pulled the blue thread or the top thread all the way down. And so you see the knot, the blue thread on the bottom. And many sewers, especially the pro sewers, will actually balance their machine using contrasting threads just so they can see this effect more profoundly, and it allows them to adjust the machine easier. But it's important to make sure that whatever thread you're going to be sewing with has the same friction properties as your test thread. So in this case, the thread for the red color has too much tension on it, and the thread for the blue color doesn't have enough. These two arrows, these amounts of tensions should be equal. Now, it's also important to understand that it's equal as the machine sews it. So if you try to pull it with your fingers from the bottom and you pull it with your fingers from the top, it will not feel the same, because you're not in the situation the machine is, where the bobbin is spinning, the foot is walking, and it's sewing. But at that instant where that knot comes tight, those tensions should be identical. In this case, this is not the situation, where the lower thread has quite a bit more tension. It's pulling the knot down. The other situation is below here, where you have the piece of leather and the red has been pulled up to the top. In this case, the top thread has too much tension and has pulled the thread to the top. And the lower section, the section that goes to the bobbin, doesn't have enough tension. So how do we fix this on many machines? Typically, we adjust the bobbin tension first as a standard, and then we'll go and adjust the top. We're going to move now to a machine, and we're going to give a couple of examples of how to do this. Okay guys, here we have a standard sewing machine. This is a Cowboy 341, very similar to other models like a 335 or a 227R. There are lots of different industrial sewing machines that use the same basic technique for applying tension to the top and applying tension to the bottom. So we're going to cover some of the ways that you can adjust the tension on these machines and how that can help you adjust the tension on yours. So let's zoom in here a little bit. And let's deal with the top first here. We've got a standard threading situation where the thread is going up through here, through this little thread guide, and for right now it's just passing straight through. And then it's going down to this ladder. It's another thread guide, and it's intended to add tension to this machine here. And in this case, we're going through once, twice, and then over to the disc, okay? And then it's going through the disc and around and down, okay? And this is the main tension assembly. There's a couple of different ways that we can add tension to this. If I want to add tension to the top thread, it's very simple. All I have to do is screw this down. Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, okay? If you're doing this, many times this can be very tight. And your thread, as it goes into the machine, can be very tight. It could be piano wire tight. You can pull a note off of that, but that's not a problem if your thread is sewing correctly. These machines are designed to generate quite a bit of thread tension. Now there's a couple of different options here as far as how you thread this that can add or reduce tension. So let's say that we need less tension. The way I have it threaded here, it creates quite a bit of tension on it, which is necessary for a higher size thread like this 138. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to thread this in such a way as to generate less tension. To do this, I'm just going to go ahead and pull that thread out so I have a loose end. Okay, so I've taken it out. I still want to go straight through that thread guide, but if I want less tension, rather than going through all two of these, I'll only go through one. So that's one way to reduce thread tension. Obviously, I can unscrew it out here, but many times that's not enough, and that this little ladder thread guide is causing a bigger problem. So you can go through only once there. Also, there, if you come over here, right here, there's a small pin. And I like to take that thread and put it under the pin. There's nothing wrong with doing so, just like that. And that helps keep the thread between the discs, but it also creates quite a bit of additional tension. So if you're having problems with too much tension, then you can pull it out from under that pin and it will move like this. So if you see it come from the ladder, like so. Now that is very, very loose tension on this machine. And of course, if you want to tighten up the tension on the machine, then you do just the opposite. First thing you do is you add in all of the holes here. There's a couple of different ways you can thread this. You can also go up and down through those as well. I like it like this. It tends to prevent kinks in it, and if there's any curls in the thread, it helps uncurl the thread. And then again, I like to put it in between the discs, come back around this pin right here, and then bring it down like that. Of course, as you wrap around this disc, you pull it up until you hear it click through that hook, and then you continue on with your threading process. Now there's another video we're going to shoot about how to thread this machine all the way through the process. Here we're just talking about increasing and reducing tensions. Okay, again, so if I wanted to add tension, normally I just crank it down here, and I'll crank it way down here, all the way down, and that's a lot of tension, but still I might need to add the number of wraps on this ladder, and I might need to go under the pin there. Generally, that will solve the issue with too much or too little tension on the top, okay? Okay, so we covered the top of the machine when it comes to adding or reducing tension. Now we're going to cover the bottom of the machine, the bobbin area. So I want you to come in really close here, and we're going to look at this. We're going to take the cover off this. Now many machines are similar. They have a top cover plate. It's what they call a drop-in bobbin. And this is one of the few differences that this machine has over others. And that is, as we go to pull the bobbin out, the bobbin case comes with the bobbin. Now you have to pardon my fat fingers here. So here we go. We have the bobbin and the bobbin case, and it sits inside that bobbin basket right there. But the important part is, and by now you will know how to thread this machine, so I'm not going to talk about this, but the important part to know is that the tension from the bobbin comes from this silver or this black strip right here. In particular, this screw right here. And this is the case for many machines. There is one screw on the bobbin that adds tension, and it's right here. It's righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. And you can tell because it clamps down on this, and it will clamp down on the thread as the thread passes by. And you will adjust it to the right a quarter of a turn, and you will adjust it to the left a quarter of a turn to tighten it or loosen it. Again, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. And you want to make this adjustment in small doses, a quarter turn or a half turn at a time, and then you try to sew the machine and see how that tension goes. Now, typically, you don't want to adjust this a whole lot, but if you're going from a large thread to a small thread, let's say you're going from a 138 down to a 69, you absolutely will have to add some tension to the bobbin. And this is especially the case if you go to a really polished thread, like a nice German thread. You'll almost certainly have to add a little tension to the bobbin, and then you'll have to add some tension on the top, because that German thread likes to flow through the machine like water, and so the machine has to add more tension to grip onto it more, add more tension to it. So again, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, that's the only screw you have to mess with, and down at the bottom, all the rest is the standard normal threading. Okay, so we just went through the tensioning in the top and the tensioning in the bottom. We talked about the different ways to thread the top and the single adjustment on the bottom for tension. Now we're going to test the machine. And what we're going to do is we're going to start out with a very thin piece of leather or fabric, and we're going to set the tensions to that. And the reason we use a very thin piece of leather to begin with is because it's much harder to set the tensions on a piece of thin leather. The knot shows up too easily. It doesn't hide in the thickness of the material. So we have to get the tensions just right in order for it to succeed. So what we're going to do is we've got this thin piece of leather, and I want you to zoom in here, and we're going to sew on it. Now I'm purposely going to set this off, take some tension off the top so that we can see what that looks like. So this leather, if you're wondering, is standard upholstery leather, and it is about 2.5 to 3 ounces. Okay, so hopefully you can see that.
It's kind of glaring.
Can you zoom in here? Can you see that clearly?
Yeah.
This is the front. It's a nice looking stitch, but the back, you can see the knot here a little bit, okay? And it's not too bad, but if we're trying to be a little bit perfect about it, we probably want to add a little tension to the top. And that's what I just did, is I actually loosened the tension over here just to make this effect happen. So we are going to add some more tension back into it, a couple of turns or so, and we're going to try sewing again. Put the leather in, hold the threads like always. Okay, so we're starting to see the knot here. Actually, a couple of times the knot has come through. What does the backside look like? Backside looks pretty good. Now, having said that, it looks like I'm seeing the knot too much there, maybe just a hair. I'm asking this big knot to live in a very thin piece of leather. So it's very difficult to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back off maybe half a turn here and try it again. And at some point we're going to reach just about the most realistic amount of tension that we can balance on this machine, and we'll just have to live with how that is. Again, this is a very thick thread, a very thin piece of leather on an industrial machine. We have to be realistic about what we can do. All right, so that's the top stitch right there. That looks pretty good. The back stitch, that looks pretty decent. Okay, so we just adjusted the single thickness for tension, and now we're going to sew off something in double thickness so we can see how that tension that we've set for the very thin, difficult to sew thin layer, how it affects a double layer. So come on in. Now we've got 2 layers here of fairly thick leather, and we're going to sew them together. Lots of room for the knot to hide in here, so it's not a good test for setting tensions, but this is closer to what we're actually going to sew. So this will be a good test for our finished stitch, if we're happy with it or not. Thicker leathers can be affected by tensions because there's more leather to cause friction in the stitch, and that has to be accounted for. Tensions do not normally need to be changed between different thicknesses of leather, but sometimes you'll need a small amount. All right, so that's the front stitch, and that's the back stitch. That's pretty decent. Maybe a little bit more tension on the top to bring the knot a little closer to this side, I think. On this machine, that's almost a full turn. There's lots of turns available on this particular adjustment, so we'll do a full turn here. Okay, so on this second stitch, that's the stitch there, that looks pretty good. Turn it over, and that bottom stitch there looks pretty good too. Okay. You can continue to perfect that if you like. Spend as much time as you want getting that stitch perfect. Maybe add another twist, another full twist there. You know, you can actually continue until you start to see the knot on the top. So that's like 2.5 twists I've added there. As long as you're not breaking your thread, it's okay. People ask me, well, can I loosen the top and can I loosen the bottom and get a looser stitch? Yes, absolutely. Well, can I tighten the top and tighten the bottom and get a tighter stitch? Yes, you can, absolutely. At some point, you'll start cutting into your leather, or you might start breaking threads if the tension is too tight, but aside from that, yeah, you can tighten it down as much as you like. All right, so that is that stitch again, right there. That's the front stitch and the back stitch, and that looks great. So I would call that tensioned. Okay, let's do this on a nice piece of pink leather here. Maybe not quite as thick as that purple, but it's still a nice piece of leather to sew. My last piece of bright pink. People love this stuff. My wife loves this pink. I made her a purse out of it one time, and she still gets asked for copies of it. You know, leather workers don't like working in pink, but the reality is that pink sells quite well. You get a lot of people who like pink and who'll pay good money for it. If you're making motorcycle bags and you like to work in black leather, make a bag in black leather with pink on it, pink thread, and watch how fast it sells. I guarantee you, there's a biker girl out there who wants pink bags for her Harley. Black leather bags with pink stitching. I guarantee it'll go. All right, so there's our pink there. There's the top stitch on that. Turn it over. There's the bottom stitch. Nice even stitch on the bottom, okay? Have to be careful of that last little piece right there, the tail. Sure enough, there you go. We'll do another video about threading this machine, the correct way to thread this. I've shown you a couple of different options on how to thread this to increase or reduce tensions. Keep those in mind, but as far as the standard threading, check out that other video. We'll do that here pretty quick too. Again, this is Alexander from Solar Leather Machines, 817-422-9151. Thanks a lot.